In 1993, a film crew from Yorkshire Television traveled to Omaha, Nebraska, in hopes of discovering information of an alleged pedophile ring. At one point, this was supposed to be an official documentary, being funded by the Discovery Channel. Once finished, the film was to be first broadcasted in the UK, along with Ireland, and afterwards, a US re-edit would be broadcasted shortly after. However, while in Nebraska, the film crew discovered something much, much deeper than what they ever anticipated. Originally attempting to shine light on just one corrupt politician, the film crew digs too deep and stumbles upon a massive operation, one which, supposedly, functions throughout the entire United States of America. The operation provided children to the wealthy to be used for drug trafficking and blackmail. Once the crew discovered the layers of what was happening, the Discovery Channel all of a sudden withdrew support for the documentary and reimbursed Yorkshire, cutting all ties with the film crew. Lastly, over in the UK, moments before airing, an unknown congressman would apparently catch wind of what was happening and threaten the TV cable industry with restrictive legislation, only if this documentary was aired. Afterwards, and almost immediately, the rights to the documentary were purchased by a mysterious unknown person, or perhaps a group of people, who then had ordered all copies and had each one destroyed. However, to much of everyone's surprise, a final hidden copy of this documentary was furnished anonymously. The documentary itself discusses the corrupt Senator Larry King and his prison time for fraudulent claims for millions of dollars. But the history behind the senator, according to this documentary, was that Larry had much worse hidden than just committing fraud.
Larry King was the fastest rising black star in the entire Republican Party of the United States during all of the 1980s. And he was also one of the most evil individuals in this country in terms of being a dealer of children, in terms of being a thief, 40 million that they documented he stole, and in terms of using and compromising and corrupting one after another politicians.
He would fund church camps, one specifically called Boys Town, then hire men to befriend some of the children at camp before inviting those kids over for quote-unquote special parties and surprises. These special parties, supposedly, were none other than pedophilic drug-fueled sex orgies that were held and sponsored by Larry King.
If you'd like to help Boys Town, send your tax-deductible gift to Father Val Peter, Boys Town, Nebraska, 68010.
The church was asked why none of the victims were speaking up, only to discover that the children were in fact speaking up, but speaking up to the wrong people. Once investigated, they would find written documents of children talking about their events, and they would find how often Larry King's name appeared in every single ignored testimony.
Despite the investigation, Larry King remained free to feed his pedophilic parties with child victims. But in 1988, a routine review brought the Boys Town cases to the attention of Nebraska's State Foster Care Review Board.
And the information presented to the Foster Care Review Board, either via the telephone reports, the personal reports, or the reports we reviewed, Larry King's name was consistently present as someone that the youth were making allegations against. I mean, I turned that information over to authorities, and nothing happened. I would say we handed over at least a foot-high amount of material. Generally speaking, the allegations were ignored.
When it came to light of Larry's fraudulent schemes, he was investigated by the IRS and the FBI, to which any and all proof of King's sex rings disappeared. As Larry's trial was about to begin, everyone who knew and researched his secret life were dialed up anonymously and then threatened to remain silent.
I received a phone call on the floor of the legislature. The caller did not identify himself, but he said, "Lauren, you do not want to have an investigation of the Franklin Federal Credit Union." And I asked who I was speaking to, and they said, "That doesn't matter, but you shouldn't have that investigation." And I said, "Well, why not?" He said, "It will reach to the highest levels of the Republican Party." And we're both good Republicans.
The night before we testified before the legislative committee, I did receive a phone call at home that said, "If you speak, you won't live to regret it."
Afterwards, the documentary displays several recordings of victims that have attended these parties, and the details they go into are difficult to listen to. I will be playing a scene or two, but the scenes I'm not displaying are because they are far too grotesque to display.
The kids he liked were mainly around the age of probably about 8 and 13. It was mainly fondling with him. He did have some... The time the infant had some other kids perform sex on the lady for saying they were burning me some cigarettes.
Okay, just take a deep breath now.
He lifted me up, kind of moved me over to the bed, said, "Let's get on the bed," and put his head down, started to me while his...
Alan Bear was a sick fuck. Didn't care, wanted sex, nasty, I don't even know if you can call it sex, and take it any way he can get it, pay for it, he liked to, but if he had to take it by force, he would. Larry King was the same kind of sick fuck Alan Bear was, except Larry King was more violent, more sure of himself, I mean, I would, see him till he bled and, just push him down, and then go out and, meet with decent people.
And with the young age, let's go off camera for a minute.
When the victims attempted to reach out to speak to the local media, the victims were then harassed, bullied, threatened, and mocked. Politicians threatened them with jail time, and the media press labeled the victims as desperate liars just looking for attention. The church camp Boys Town that Larry King would have these victims groomed at was asked to comment on their connections, but would heavily decline on providing a comment.
We asked for an interview with Chief Executive Father Val Peter, but Boys Town's public affairs officer refused.
I would have to give you a flat no. I'm just going to tell you at this point that we will not participate with you. We have no interest in talking to you folks. It's something that we don't even care to delve into.
However, the film crew would actually go on to arrive at the Boys Town Center, confront the father who they spoke with earlier, but of course, this only panned out to them being kicked out and simply being told that Boys Town was never connected to Larry King, despite all of the evidence and testimonies that said otherwise.
Please step outside.
Why is it that Boys Town is unwilling to discuss your relationship with Larry King?
We don't have a relationship with Larry.
I'm afraid papers that we possess show that Boys Town had a relationship with Larry King.
I just suggest you be very careful about what you report. Excuse me? Unless you leave.
The documentary remains disturbing, unsettling, and emotionally devastating the entire time. And unlike others that I've watched, the making behind the documentary has a history just as unsettling as the film itself. And there are many things that I've skipped over, simply because I feel this video would become too long. There are conspiracies of murders to silence journalists, conspiracies of murdering a victim's family members to keep them quiet, evidence suddenly vanishing right after a quote-unquote accident, There is evidence of the FBI forcing victims to manipulate each other. This would actually go on to cause one of the victims, Alicia Owen, to be arrested. At the time of the documentary, she was sentenced to serve jail for 25 years. Even with all of the evidence to get her out, strings are somehow being pulled to keep everyone at bay, letting the innocent rot while the monsters roam free. This documentary is a lot to take in, and I heavily recommend you to be cautious when viewing it. To this day, Conspiracy of Silence remains quote-unquote unaired. Sound of Torture was released in 2013, and it holds no punches to its content. The film's first title card announces the setting for the film, giving a historic backstory to Eritrea, a country in Northeast Africa. By 1993, Eritrea began ruling via military dictatorship. The livelihood in Eritrea is horrific on a good day, and any citizens that attempt to escape are shot to death at the border. It is not unknown of these consequences, as there is a shoot-to-kill policy in place. Despite this, though, the living conditions are much worse, causing over 300,000 citizens to have fled between 2001 to 2013. With the context being provided, the screen fades to black, and we are given a slight taste for what's in store for us. The documentary ends by stating, around 4,000 people are known to have died in the Sinai Desert, and countless others have disappeared. Those who are still alive are not safe either. In Israel, they are categorized as infiltrators with no legal status whatsoever. Maron Estefanos continues lobbying international institutions, yet no solutions for Eritrean refugees has been formulated. Meanwhile, the torture camps continue to operate unimpeded. Sound of Torture gives a face to those unheard of, and it demands their voices to be listened to without censoring. Their stories must be heard. No exceptions allowed. Originally translated as Fung Hai, Til Madness Do Us Part runs itself up to nearly being 4 hours long, with the language being in Mandarin, with English subtitles. Early into researching the film, I noticed that a lot of websites' summaries of Til Madness Do Us Part were rather vague and empty, as if they themselves couldn't find the words to describe it. 50 men live for 12 months in a madhouse, they passing their days in a single plane and having little contact with the medical team. Every one of the inmates is not there for mental health problems, but for killing someone for committing a crime against public officials. Within the gates of an isolated mental institution in southwest China's Yunnan province, patients are confined to one single floor of a building. Once locked in, with little contact from the outside world, anything goes. It sounded like a standard prison fear-mongering film to me, but this wasn't beyond scared straight though. This was much, much different. No music, no narration, no story. Just real life. The documentary begins with several bunkmates beginning to wake up, and within seconds, the environment of the entire film is established. Dread-filled sobs, crazed laughter, empty singing, and void stares are all we're introduced to. While I won't pinpoint every single prisoner's name in the film, I must mention that one prisoner in particular is simply titled as Unknown. Do not confuse that with it being a nickname that he gave himself. The prisoner is a mute. His entire history was wiped, simply because no one in the Institute knows who he is. Therefore, he is simply unknown. Meds are given, complaints are made, and then we cut to an inmate washing another's feet. It becomes a bit more clear as to why this documentary is nearly 4 hours long, as this scene alone lasts several minutes for whatever reason. Possibly, it's to be seen as a religious symbol, or it could very well be an intimacy reason. There is very, very little context to the scenes, and no narrations at all to provide information. It can quickly become frustrating. The cameraman follows this particular man, watching as he talks nonsense among himself, bothers sleeping prisoners, screams out to the hospital staff, and demands to go home. Eventually his name is given, and we learn that he's only been here for 5 months, a period of time that is minuscule compared to other inmates. For whatever reason, we end up focusing a lot on him, and there is even a semi-entertaining bit where he just books it. It's clear that the documentary doesn't have a story. It's clear that it doesn't want a story. It doesn't even want to spin this into a story. It simply just wants you to witness, to experience this human purgatory. There is no getting out. There is no getting better. You are here. This is the end. The dumping ground for society. We can only sit back and watch hours of film featuring scared, lost, and confused individuals that were plunged deep into this moldy, empty prison. There are shots that linger for way too long, but perhaps that's their point. An edit that lasts 15 minutes would be considered too long, but that 15 minutes of boredom and emptiness, that right there, that's their life. Maybe it wasn't intended to fluff the film, to gain watch time and please an algorithm like we're all used to, but rather to give you the slightest hint on what they deal with. Because this is every day. This is forever. The movie ends stating, "The film was recorded between January and April 2013 in a mental hospital in Yunnan Province, southwestern China. The hospital houses over 200 male and female patients, all of whom were committed involuntarily, some by their families, some by the Chinese police or courts. In this impoverished region, the vast majority of patients and their families cannot afford to pay for their treatment. Violent and non-violent patients are housed together. Some were labeled criminally insane after murdering parents, spouses, children, neighbors, or strangers. Some were committed for drug or alcohol abuse, disorderly conduct, fighting, or vagrancy. Some were committed after suffering mental breakdowns or exhibiting, quote-unquote, aberrant behavior, such as intense religious devotion, repeated political petitioning, or opposition to family planning laws. Others were committed simply for being developmentally disabled, adrift or abandoned, unable to communicate or to provide for themselves. The hospital rolls list 2 patients, 1 female, 1 male, both named unknown. I entered this with the expectation of assault, abuse, neglect, gore, and debauchery. And instead, I finished this movie feeling void and ashamed. Children Underground is an American 2001 documentary film. The film itself is set in Romania, as we explore the lives of 5 children, ages ranging wildly between 8 years old to 16 years old, all who are surviving in a post-communist society. The children are recorded from afar and up close, as they all participate in street fighting, self-harm, and becoming addicted to inhalants. The film starts off with the fact that, at the time of the collapse, former communist leader Nicolae Ceausescu had banned contraceptives like condoms and birth control, along with abortion, and this was done in order to increase the workforce and keep a reliable source of workers generated over the years. Thousands of unwanted children were placed in state orphanages, where they faced terrible conditions. With the fall of communism, many children moved onto the streets. Some were from orphanages. Others were runaways. This is the story of 5 children who live in a subway station in Bucharest, Romania. After the title cards, the scene immediately initiates with children begging and stealing from surrounding passerbyers. They threaten each other, attack one another, laugh and dance, and huff paint. We get our first backstory of one of the older kids, a shaved teenager who beats and whips the others into submission if they do not do as told. We then discover that this teenager is, in fact, a girl named Christina. Christina had to disguise herself as a man in order to stay safe on the streets. It's good not to give in, she says. Not to be a mute, not to be quiet. They hit, I hit back. All of the kids get high. All of them. No one can stop using Auralac. The camera zooms into a girl, Macarena, as her fingers, hands, and face are smothered with silver paint. She picks up the bag and inhales deeply. Once she finishes, she looks emptily towards the camera, and her eyes are glassy and bloodshot. Macarena is only 14 years old. She trades a bottle of paint for some baked fish, and the kids that she trades with dance and cheer, as when they're on the streets, huffing paint is their leisure time. Each one of them is independently asked why they're on the streets, and after many interviews, the unfortunate response from almost all of them is that it's safer. If they have parents, the parents are abusive alcoholics. And if they were orphans, then the facilities would beat them and lock them in solitude. Therefore, being homeless is the safest answer for a child in post-communist Romania. Unfortunately, the majority of the documentary consists of kids attacking each other, of kids getting high and begging for money. It's depressing. However, there is growth and change throughout the film. Some of the kids are brought into protective services, where they attend classes, and seem to be treated with love for the first time.
Să fii cu mintea în afară de asta. Și să înveți în afară de asta. Primul lucru care îl faci când intri într-o casă. Știi? Să respecti regulile. Da? Deci e cea mai mare regulă de la noi de aici, să fii curat.
Other kids choose to remain on the streets, believing thoroughly that it is the best decision for themselves. Despite this being a long, emotionally draining movie, it's the only one on this list that even attempts to sprinkle in high notes, instead of taking the stereotypical pessimistic route that we've seen before, where there is no hope whatsoever. This documentary attempts to show that there is potential for light at the end of the tunnel. Although rather bleak, it glimmers regardless.